Your word today. We again remember Marcus as he goes for his operation tomorrow. Thank you for those who gave for the pastors so they can have wheels to visit their area and their congregation, Lord. So bless us now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I want to begin with a question, and the question is this. When we talk of hope, the topic of hope, what comes to mind for you? What would hope look like for you? Perhaps there's something you can think of right now. Maybe you're going through a hard time. Maybe you're hoping for someone else. What actually is hope? What is it? Maybe a better question to ask is, what do our longings and our need for hope tell us about the world in which we live? Because we say things like, I hope it won't rain tomorrow. I hope I pass that exam. I hope I'll get that new promotion at work. I hope I don't catch a cold. I hope I get a break soon. You see, our human experience of hope usually implies that there's just something wrong that needs to be corrected. Something that is out of order that needs to be put back in order. That there's some wrong to be righted, some balance to be had, some suffering to be endured and overcome, something wrong with the world and wrong with my experience that needs to be put right and put back in order. Hope is so essential to our everyday living and our experiences that hopelessness can be utterly devastating for those who experience hopelessness, or should we say an absence of hope. You take away a person's hope and life under the sun. Now that phrase, life under the sun, is a phrase that's used in the Bible to talk about our earthly existence. Life under the sun can become utterly absurd, intolerable, and seemingly meaningless. Absolute hopelessness leads some people into a kind of existential nihilism. And what we mean by that is they see no purpose or meaning or joy or value in anything. That's where utter hopelessness can take a person in the extremes, where there is no intrinsic value to life for them. Money doesn't seem to make them happy. Sex leaves them feeling empty. Food and wine no longer satisfy the appetites. Wisdom, education, knowledge, power, riches, even the experience of poverty when a person is fed up with riches, relationships, all of those things, some bad, some good, without hope, they all appear meaningless in the end. And the only thing that is certain is death and taxes. Without hope, everything is vapor, everything is smoke, everything is meaningless, everything, it seems, is a chasing after the wind. Now, there's a famous atheist, he was big in the 90s, he's not so popular now, Professor Richard Dawkins, you'll know him, most of you'll know him. He wrote in one of his books, The River Out of Eden, in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces, and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any reason or any rhyme to any of it. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at the bottom of it no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. That, friends, it's a lie, Julie, you're right. but it's also if I could call it, the gospel of atheism. There is nothing but cold, pitiless indifference. In this worldview, there is no real hope beyond death. You might say it's a hopeless gospel. The universe doesn't care about you. The universe has no feelings about you. But by contrast, the Christian gospel declares that not only is there a creator, a God who made you and made you to bring him glory and made you to find joy in bringing him glory, the Bible teaches us that there is real hope to be had. Real hope even in the face of certain death and taxes. And this is what Christmas hope is about. You see, Christmas is fundamentally about the arrival of hope. Hope that does away with the apparent futility and absurdity and meaninglessness of life under the sun. Christmas is about Christ, the one who was promised to come from ancient times. Now, I did say this last week, and I'm going to repeat it because I want to hammer it home. We may think that the Christmas story begins in the Nativity and the manger with Jesus 2,000 years ago, but it doesn't. The promise of Christmas hope goes all the way back to Genesis. It's as old as creation itself, and it begins in Genesis 3. Now remember, we said that our experience of hope and the longing in our hearts that looks for hope implies that there is something wrong with the world. There's something that isn't right. There's something that's not meant to be. And in Genesis 3, we see the origin of human death. Human death, it seems, was never meant to be a part of God's good creation until Adam and Eve sinned against God. Adam and Eve were the representative heads of humanity. And they collude with the serpent, albeit Eve was deceived, but Adam wasn't. That makes him worse in my opinion, but he wasn't deceived. Okay, he knew what he was doing. They collude with the serpent in paradise to usurp the living God. Creatures of the dust, whom are birthed in love and tenderness, commit cosmic treason against the Most High. They rebel against the one who created them and loved them and breathed them into life. And consequently, because they are over creation, because they're God's people, they're stewards of all that God has made, and they're to have dominion over the creation, not just Eden. They're to bring God's presence and peace and image God out to the creation. Because they rebel against God, now that all that was put under them, as stewards, as gardeners, has become cursed. So the ground becomes cursed. Thorns and thistles appear. Creatures of the dust commit treason against the Most High. And death enters the world, and we, their descendants, are forever felt in its effects. And some of us might not like that idea that because of someone else's choices that we are suffering the effects today. But that's true of life, isn't it, in general? The Bible would go on to say that it's not just that death passed on to all men because Adam and Eve sinned, although that is true, but each of us has chosen to go our own way. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. So human death enters the world. 10 out of 10 people will die. Man and woman are banished from the paradise presence of God. Innocence lost. Paradise lost. Intimacy and fellowship with God, our Creator and neighbor, lost. And consequently, in chapters 4 of Genesis, we see violence and injustice and oppression begin to ravage God's good creation. It's the tragedy of tragedies. It's epic. And even worse, the shadow of the darkness of death now seems to eclipse and rule over everything. The New Testament says it like this: therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people, because all sinned. Death, it seems, is the great equalizer, the great tyrant, the great enemy of humanity. All men and women die because all have sinned. It's awful. And you're thinking, this is the worst Christmas sermon I've ever heard. But we also see in Genesis chapter 3, mercy. Mercy in the face of judgment and the promise of real hope. God, full of love, infinite in his compassion, and full of grace, even though he's the judge of all the universe, doesn't abandon his image-bearing creatures to the futility and the frustration of the curse. God provides to Adam and Eve a living hope that they may one day experience life beyond the grave, life beyond death. And some would dare to argue as well, life in the present. This hope is promised in the form of a gift. A Christmas present. Where's Kai? He's not there. A person. A seed. An offspring of the woman that we talked about last week. And this seed is going to come, and he's going to crush that dragon's head. My old friend Ian Morrison used to say, smash his head in. That's what he's going to do. I will put enmity between the woman and between your offspring and her offspring. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. This seed of the woman will be hurt by the serpent, but ultimately the seed will defeat the dragon. But this seed will do something else. He will liberate creation itself from its curse, and the whole earth will once again, and we're waiting for this, become a paradise, Eden of God. You all probably have a thought of heaven as this place we go to when we die. There's some truth to that, but the Bible has a much more hopeful picture for us than that. Heaven is a place on earth. Heaven is coming to earth. Your resurrection is not immaterial floaty light on the clouds playing harps, and then down in hell all the people are having a party. That's not true. Heaven is where the party is. Heaven is where the milk is, the honey is, the feasting, the laughing, the rejoicing, the good wine. And heaven will be a place on earth. For those who believe, you will have a resurrected, physical, material, spiritual body. I'm going to have a six-pack. The anointed one is promised to come, the one through whom all the nations will be blessed. But Genesis has more to tell us about this promised descendant. Folks, I'm just going to say from the outset, I'm going to run a little bit over. If the children come in, that's okay. I think it's important today. And if you have somewhere urgent to be, I'll not judge you. That's fine. Just go. But I think this is important. The narrative of Genesis at this point has been like a cinema blockbuster, right? So you've got creation, and it's just flipping exciting. You know, God is creating structure, and then he's filling it, and it's all, and he's saying it's good, it's good, it's good, it's so good, it's very good. It's like a love song. And then he creates humanity, Adam, but Adam's lonely and he needs a helper, and then he brings along Eve, and it's so romantic. bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, you shall be called woman. And they come together and they're stewarding God's creation, and then it all just goes terribly wrong. There's a horrible tragedy that takes place. They commit treason against God. And then Cain kills Abel, and we have the first murder. You know, some of you probably read murder mysteries. They're exciting. You're reading this, you're like, gosh, this is great. You're reading this, and then then the earth is filled with violence and oppression, and then you get to Genesis chapter 5, and you read, and so begat so-and-so, and they lived 800 years, and they died, and so begat so-and-so, and it's this long genealogy. And you're most of us do that because most of us haven't maybe been taught how to read the Bible properly and how to study. And that's okay. That's why we need help sometimes and to get into a group to dig in deeper. But these genealogies are important. They're there for a reason. In many ways, this reading that we had, Genesis chapter 5, it seems like a ridiculous detour. What has it got to do with the story? Because what people do is they see these fantastic numbers, so-and-so lived 900 years, and they get lost in the weeds, and they start trying to figure out how old the earth is, and how do the dinosaurs fit into all this, and all this other stuff. But the meaning of the text gets lost in all of this. These texts are here to tell us the hope of the gospel. You see, each generation, represented by hundreds of years, presented a fresh opportunity for the offspring of the woman to arise and crush humanity's oppressors. This is what they were waiting for. For hundreds of years, they're waiting for this promised seed to come. Where is he? Because everyone around here keeps dying, including poor Lamech, or Mahalalel. With the exception of Enoch, who's given to us as an example as someone who actually found life by walking with God. Each life was taken away, and so we read, so-and-so was born, and he died. He's not the hero. He's not the dragon slayer. He's not the one who's going to come and crush the serpent. It's depressing reading. How could anyone back then have any peace and any rest in the midst of a cursed world where everyone dies? Meaningless, utterly meaningless. And the question for me and you is how can any of us have peace and rest this Christmas in the midst of a cursed world full of suffering, full of violence, full of oppression, full of cancer, full of greed and viruses, homelessness, loneliness of epic proportions, cost of living crisis? Now, if we're optimists, we can numb ourselves with pleasure and wine. We can focus on the bright side of life, the good stuff. We can eat and drink and be merry. That's what the ancients used to say, for tomorrow we die. Try to live a good life, try to better ourselves, become a better person, but none of that is going to deal with the actual problem, which is the curse that we're all under, that's going to pass to our children and our children's children. None of that will give us life beyond death or lift the curse of death that is upon us. Think too much about it, and one might be tempted to despair. Again, you're thinking, this is the worst Christmas sermon I've ever heard. I want to come out of this place feeling better than I went in. Well, in the midst of this genealogy, where everyone is born only to die, we encounter a man whose father names him Lamech. Poor guy. Lamech's name means the despairing one. What a poor soul. Now, in that culture, names really meant something, okay? So it's not like ours where we just pick a name because we like how it sounds. They meant something. But Lamech, he's not as pessimistic an individual as me or his father. He doesn't live up to his name. Instead of despairing because of the curse, he chooses something. He chooses to trust in God's promise to Eve. And so when he gets a son of his own, when he becomes a daddy, he calls him Noah, which means rest, peace, comfort. You see, Lamech, he acknowledges the frustration of cursed creation, but he finds rest in God's promised hope, and so he names his child Rest. When he lived 182 years, he fathered a son, and he called him Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. So we said that names always mean something. Now, I wasn't particularly good at the original languages when I studied theology. I'll be honest with you, I'm slightly dyslexic, and I was just pretty awful. So if I am told something about the Greek or Hebrew, I try to study deep, and I try to look up a lexicon, and I try to get the secondary opinions, and I ran this by the Old Testament lecturer, and it checks out. It's not one of these silly Bible codes. It's there. It has to do with the root of the Hebrew words, not the stems of the Hebrew words, but the roots of the Hebrew words. And when you line the genealogy up in Genesis, you find that we have Adam. Adam means man. Then we have Seth. Seth means the appointed one. Then we have Enosh, which means mortal or to die, sorrow. Just get my notes here. Kenan means sorrow, beg your pardon. Mahalalel means the blessed God. El Shaddai. El, the blessed God. Jarad shall come down. It's the idea of coming down towards the earth. Enoch means to preach or to teach. Methuselah means, it actually means his stretching, his being stretched out, but it's sometimes referred to as dying. Lamech means the despairing one, and Noah means rest. There in Genesis 5, not in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament, way back in the beginning, we have the promise of Christmas. Adam, man, is appointed to die. But the blessed God, or the glory of God is another way of saying it. The glory of God shall come down preaching or teaching. And his death, his stretching out, Methuselah, will bring the despairing ones, Lamech, rest, Noah. God always knew what he was doing way back then. The writers didn't put this in as a coincidence. They were inspired by the Spirit of God. And for those of you who have never read the Bible, I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes, but you still have to promise me you're going to go read it, right? Because people find the Bible hard. They find the New Testament easier, but they find the Old Testament hard because of all the blood, guts, and gory things that occur. Funny enough, they have no problem watching violent programs on TV, but it's just the Bible they take a hard time out on. The Old Testament can be summed up in this phrase: someone's coming. Someone is coming. And when you open up Mark's gospel in the New Testament, good news, everyone, he's come. The glory of God has come down preaching and his stretching forth will bring the despairing rest. Okay? Now, I went to a conference a few years ago on preaching and the Bible, and they showed me something absolutely amazing. They showed me a scroll, a digital version on the screen, of the prophet Isaiah. Now, Isaiah was a prophet who ministered. You can read his book in the Old Testament somewhere between 700 and 800 BC. Okay? And in 1929, they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls among the Qumran